Episode 11, Clip 7, Questionable Standard of Care, the Fat Shot, the Drug Price Scam, and a Real Solution.
Time, and our country has a lot of issues with being sick and obese and so forth. And ultimately, a lot of the things that I see in our healthcare system today are very disturbing. A lot of the standard of care, the way things are done in the hospitals and in the clinics are, if nothing else, questionable as to whether they're the best things to do. One of my favorite examples has to do with type 2 diabetes, which used to be called adult onset diabetes, but you can't call it that anymore because now children in schools for the first time in elementary schools have it. And it's a lifestyle disease. It's caused by consuming basically too much sugar, having a metabolic illness that your body can't deal with the sugar that you're consuming. And these patients have, their bodies are producing insulin to try to deal with the sugar they consume. So the hallmark of type 2 diabetes, which is the opposite of type 1 diabetes, where someone's born with an insufficiency typically in their insulin production. Type 2 diabetics have massive amounts of insulin, way too much. They're what's called hyperinsulinemic. And what's really stark, and in the last few months alone, in speaking with some people who have basically been diagnosed type 2 diabetic, it's shocking how many of them have been prescribed first oral medications, but then ultimately insulin. So you're giving someone that has way too much insulin, more insulin, and then when that doesn't work, you give even more. And it's mind-boggling to think that a physician could actually believe that's going to ever solve the problem, because it won't. And although insulin will help in the short term in an emergent situation and in bridging the patient to better health, and I'm not saying anyone should stop taking what they're taking, they need to have these conversations with their doctor for any medication. They should always ask, if I take this, doctor, will it make me better? Is this what will make me better? Or is just this a Band-Aid, a stopgap to get me through to doing the things I need to do to get better? And there are so many of these scenarios. And as we've talked before about the pharmaceutical industry and the advertising and the ads that are not always completely forthright as to the potential true benefits, which may be not as much as you would think from the ads, and the potential risks, it's mind-boggling. And one of the challenges in our country, here in the United States, we do have challenges. Our healthcare system, we spend an awful lot of money. The money we spend per capita outpaces all these other countries, yet we have sicker individuals. And it's been discovered that a lot of the money that we have that's funding the healthcare system here is actually being essentially rerouted to other countries to help them with their healthcare systems when we're in dire needs. I think that it's important that we focus on correcting the ailments and problems that we have within our system. And one of the things has to do with the disparities. We've talked about how I lived on the Mexican border in Texas for 11 years. And people would routinely walk into Mexico, go to a pharmacy there, and come back with the medication they needed. And in Mexico, the medication actually is stamped with the maximum price that can be charged for the medication. And if no one wants to pay the max, so people will look and go, I don't want to pay that. What better can you do? And there's a lot of pharmacies. If you go to the border towns in Mexico, there's pharmacies on every street corner. And a lot of Americans will go get the medication, come back, and they pay a fraction of what they would have to pay here. Our drug costs are some of the highest in the world. And what's even worse is these companies are based in the United States that are creating these drugs. There's that clip with President Trump talking about his friend. Do you not think that one was hilarious?
Yeah, my fat friend and his fat shot. Let's take a look.
Yeah, I want to pull that clip up. It's so typical President Trump, but he's right, and it really makes the point. It is one of these big challenges we have had. There are a lot of people that can't afford their medication here in the United States, that if they were in another country, they wouldn't be paying so much. That's a problem because it may be the medication that they need. And people have always wondered, why is it? And we'll get to that in a second. But this is a terrific example, although quite amusing the way he presents it about his friend who is taking the quote unquote fat shot, which obviously he's referring to GLP-1 agonists, which we actually talked about in the last episode. Let's listen in what he has to say. And if nothing else, just remember it's President Trump talking, and he presents things in his own certain way.
I'll tell you a story. A friend of mine who's a businessman, very top guy. Most of you would have heard of him. A highly neurotic, brilliant businessman, seriously overweight, and he takes the fat shot drug. And he called me up and he said, President, he calls me, he used to call me Donald, now he calls me President, so that's nice respect. But he's a rough guy, smart guy, very successful, very rich. I wouldn't even know how we would know this, but because he's got comments. President, could I ask you a question? What? I'm in London, and I just paid for this damn fat drug I take. I said, it's not working. He said, I just paid $88, and in New York I pay $1,300. What the hell is going on? He said, so I checked, and it's the same box, made in the same plant, by the same company. It's the identical pill that I buy in New York. And here I'm paying $88 in London. In New York, I'm paying $1,300. Now, this is a great businessman, but he's not familiar with this crazy situation that we have. But he was stunned. But it was just one of those stories. And I brought it up with the drug companies, represented by somebody who's very smart, good person too. And we argued about it for about half hour, and then finally he just said, because they can't justify it, he just said, look, you got me. You got me. I can no longer they've been justifying this crap for years. They said, oh, it's research and development. Well, I said, research and development, other countries should pay research and development too. It's for their benefit.
Yeah, that's the real point, is Americans have been scammed in terms of healthcare costs in general for a very long time. Starting, of course, with medicine, but not just ending there. It's very sad, but the same drug that can cost, like I saw a malaria drug in the United States, it costs whatever, it's like $100. In other Western countries with quote unquote socialized medicine, it was like 10, 12, $15. So that's an entire order of magnitude. And then in Egypt, which apparently has high levels of HIV, it was selling for 20 cents. You know what I mean? So you have at least a 10x improvement every single round. And that's crazy. But what that also means is the contrary, right?
It same thing even in Canada, just to our north. There were a lot of pharmacies that were trying to sell, and they were for years, selling the medication back into the United States from a Canadian pharmacy. Same drugs, same things, same packaging. The difference is in the United States, we're different. Just like we're one of the two countries that actually allows media ads from the pharmaceutical makers, we also don't have the same protections on drug prices that in other countries. They're not allowed selling the drugs beyond a certain price. And that needs to change. And the reason, in part, has to do with the amount of extra money that's built in to the ultimate final price on these drugs to essentially pay, I'm not going to say pay off, because that sounds perhaps a little crooked, but to provide payments to the middlemen, so to speak, and women, and the different layers that we probably shouldn't have. Ultimately, the good news is that President Trump did sign an executive order, which is going to change the way that drug pricing is made available. And this wasn't possible during the first Trump presidency, but there's been some changes in the law. And essentially now they're able to make it so that the same pricing that's available direct from these companies can be available to the American consumer. And I just want to run the part that actually is a momentous occasion where this is being signed, and RFK Jr. is actually leading the charge, and he's there speaking. So let's play that. And this is an important thing for everyone that knows somebody, if not themselves, that's on prescription medication here.
This is an extraordinary day. This is an issue that I grew up in the Democratic Party, and every major Democratic leader for 20 years has been making this promise to the American people. This was the fulcrum of Bernie Sanders' runs for presidency, that he was going to eliminate this discrepancy between Europe and the United States. But as it turns out, none of them were doing it. It's one of these promises that politicians make to their constituents, knowing that they'll never have to do it. And the reason they'll never have to do it is because they know that Congress is controlled in so many ways by the pharmaceutical industry. There's at least one pharmaceutical lobbyist for every congressman, every senator on Capitol Hill, and every member of the Supreme Court. By some estimates, 3. Pharmaceutical companies, the industry itself spends 3 times what the next largest lobbyist spends on lobbying. So this was an issue that people talked about, but nobody wanted to do anything because it was radioactive. They knew you couldn't get it by Congress. We now have a president who is a man of his word, who has the courage.
It's a big deal. It's a very big deal.
It really is. It really is. It's monumental just because it basically makes the United States a preferred state customer, basically, which means that the United States must receive the lowest price of any other. He said a few times any other country, but then he fixed it. Any other developed country, basically.
Right.
What defines as a developed country or not could be extremely influential now, but that does make sense that the United States will get the lowest price of any developed country, and that way we don't have to worry about other rich countries trying to force us to pay for the R&D for these drug companies, or for them not to use their profits to pay for their R&D because they're getting the money from other routes. At the end of the day, it will be a forcing function for these companies to lower their prices in the United States and then to more competitively price things internationally, because they're going to have to raise prices internationally, but it is what it is. It was absurd what was happening, and the prices were ridiculous. They say that in capitalism, the value of a good is determined by how much people are willing to pay for it. Willing comes from the word will, right? They actually want it. When it comes to drugs, nobody has a will for it, right? You're told by your doctor this is going to help you with symptoms, with an issue, with a disease you have, right? So you take it against your will, basically. It's not something people want. And therefore, having this capitalistic market saying, just if Americans are willing to pay $100, then it is what it is. When in reality, for 2/3 of Americans, it's Medicare or Medicaid paying for it, or VA or something, right? And then for those remaining third, they're losing their pants paying for these drugs. So it really is hugely revolutionary in terms of the cost of drugs in the United States, and that I think that's a wonderful thing.
So that now, for the first time in recent history, Medicare can actually negotiate pricing. It couldn't do that before, and you'd be surprised just how many
absurd to think about.
It's government. What do you expect? And then ultimately, there's way more people. It's not just 1/3. There's a tremendous number of people who, older people, fixed income. They're literally.
Be sure to watch our other clips and shorts and the entire episode 11 of The YoJo Show.